All right. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our virtual alumni workshop on navigating job search challenges. Before we begin, we're going to take a moment here to pause so that everyone has a chance to log on. While we wait, feel free to type your name, grad year if you're an alum, and what brought you here today in the chat box, and we'll begin in just a moment. Well, my name is Molly Clevin, and I'm from the University of Minnesota Duluth Alumni Relations team. Today's Alumni Career Workshop is brought to you in partnership with our office and the UMD Career Center. You'll explore effective strategies for navigating job search and career change challenges. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Alumni Relations website. You'll receive an email with the link once that is ready. Finally, we'll have time at the end of the presentation to answer live questions. To submit a question, use the question and answer button on the bottom of your screen. Now to introduce our guests. Today we are joined by Sherrill Yeaton, Career Development Specialist and Multicultural Outreach Specialist, and Mara Rosenwinkel, Employer Engagement Associate, both from the UMD Career Center. Sherrill enjoys connecting with students in a variety of ways, including resumes, cover letters, personal statements, diversity statements, LinkedIn profile development, and much more. Mara is the Employment Engagement Associate at the University of Minnesota Duluth Career Center, where she connects UMD students and alumni with employers through events, workshops, and partnerships. It is now my pleasure to hand it over to Sherrill and Mara.
Hello, well, welcome everyone to the first Alumni Career Workshop of 2025. Welcome back if you've attended in the past. Welcome to those who are new. We're happy to engage with you over this hour. Mara and I will share some information and strategies about navigating the job search and potential challenges, as well as some resources, and then of course the Q&A, and also some ways that you can get in contact with us after the workshop for further discussion. So we'll just jump right into the content. And if you have nearby a piece of paper, something to write with, a device, something where you can take some notes, I just want to take for some framing at the beginning, just about a minute to write down, just kind of brainstorm, write down all of your top strengths, positive attributes, skills, everything that you sort of bring to the table. So just a brain dump. We probably won't, in the interest of time, we probably won't take the full minute, but just take a minute just to write down all of your strengths and qualities. All right, hopefully you got some of those down. Keep writing as they come to you. But just for some framing for this whole workshop. So if you feel comfortable, I see people already putting things in the chat, but if you feel comfortable and want to share one or more of your strengths in the chat, we'd love to see what some of those are. Just kind of get some positive vibes going here. You can also take this time to maybe highlight some of those strengths or qualities that will empower you and help empower you during your job search or career change, or some that might be specific to the position, your desired position that you're working towards, and kind of circle or highlight any of those also. And at any time, feel free to add those or your other comments in the chat, since it's a good way that we can engage and learn about all of you. But our office and our work with careers, we take a positive psychology lens, so sort of building on strengths. You might be familiar with this concept from Gallup. That's just kind of one explanation of positive psychology. But if you've taken the Clifton Strengths Finder, you've maybe seen this through Gallup. But the Gallup organization explains positive psychology as identifying the talents and strengths in individuals, as well as organizations, and then helping develop them and excel by building upon those talents and strengths. So we want to just start off taking sort of that lens of, taking your talents, your strengths that you have, and then using those to help empower you in your job searching and career development and career changing. So ways that relates specifically within the job search. When we work with folks, we always remind them to begin with what you do have and not what you don't have. Um, Often when we work with people, they start off by saying, well, maybe they're practicing interviewing, I don't have a lot of experience in this field, but, and then continue with something else, or I haven't had an internship, I haven't had a job in this field, or something that they don't have. So we always encourage folks to, lead with your strengths, start with what you do have. I bring this experience that would relate, or I have these strengths that would help me to develop in that area that I don't have within this specific job or field. This is how this might, relate or prepare me for this or help me to bring a different perspective. And just a way to practice communicating those. As you're talking about your strengths, coming up with examples and, concrete information, ways that they would relate to that specific position or organization as you're navigating this process. Everything from, initial, connecting with or communicating with folks at the organization to your actual resume, your interviewing. I was working with an alum not too long ago who was feeling like the interviews weren't going as well because where they had used the particular strengths or qualities or skills they were looking for in the job they were currently applying for, which was more related to their degree and interests, had been a while ago. And they were feeling like they had to start with most recently what they were doing. So we just sort of flipped that to say, here's the position or the experience or the research that most relates. And then in the meantime, I've taken these other jobs that have further honed those strengths or, help me bring this to the table. So kind of feeling that freedom to be able to talk about the ones that are going to best showcase or most relate. And then also incorporating strengths into your job search. If you're good at connecting with people, use that with networking, detail oriented, really keeping track of your contacts that you've made, which applications you've submitted when and all that. So really using your strengths as part of this whole process.
Next, we are going to talk about the flip side to strength. So, I want you to take a minute and think about some of the challenges or barriers you might have been facing, either in your current position or during like the job search process. There's some examples on the slide that you can think of, but I want you to make a list. Either it's a mental list, a list that you could write down, and if you feel comfortable, you can share some of the challenges in the chat, but I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to go ahead and make that list. I know we have some folks who've mentioned in the chat about underemployment. That's a big one. Looking at some job changes. And those are some of the topics that we're going to be talking about today as we go on through the presentation.
All right. Yes, great variety of skills as well as challenges in the chat there. Continue to drop your ideas as we go through the rest of the presentation. So one topic that was requested when the alumni office asked for some feedback on what they might want to hear from us was about the topic of disclosure and or navigating the workplace with a disability or other factors that you may or may not bring into the job search. So we did want to touch on that first. These are just some considerations to think about. So this is from the lens of navigating disability in the workplace, but can also relate to other potential needs in the workplace, other aspects of your identity, and deciding if, when, or if needed to disclose information and at what time during the process. So, for instance, the considerations would be, whether or not to disclose. So there's no requirement legally, ethically of disclosing something at any point during the job search process. If that's something that an individual chooses, considerations would be when to disclose that information, and then where or how, and sort of what situation or context. And we'll look at a little more specifics to that. So just to consider, anything that you are providing to the employer during this process, whether it's, as you're applying through an interview, when you get to accepting the offer, negotiating salary. So it's all completely up to the individual. So we do work with folks individually, which is one reason why we'll information after the workshop to have further discussion or even practice with some of these topics as you may be encountering them in the workplace or in your, switching to potentially a different job, or, some said, looking for that first job after graduation too. So completely your decision, very individual decision. And another consideration too is if the information you are choosing or not choosing to disclose is in fact related to that specific position or the duties that would be performed in that job. Certainly navigating this process, aside from in our professional work here in the Career Center, with family and friends, when I have worked with folks on navigating this, there may be certain situations where it really makes sense to provide information, and times where it just isn't relevant information to that particular position, that job, that class. There could be situations where it would be more or less relevant. And just a reminder, with anything that comes up in the job, once you are in a job, you can disclose information that would be relevant to the employer at any time. So there's no pressure to decide once you are deciding on whether or not you want to accept a job, because sometimes it's hard to know. I mean, we all get into new jobs and like, oh, I didn't realize this was exactly what I'd be doing in my job, or didn't realize that this was something that maybe I wanted to consider. So that's certainly an option at any time. And then just the usual, finding a quiet or confidential space, a time that makes sense and that both people or the people involved can be fully focusing on that without distractions. And this and any other topic is something too that we will provide resources for alumni later on, but that you can practice these skills with any of us at any time, or with another trusted resource that you feel comfortable with, to feel just more prepared. The more we can talk through things or practice, get feedback, maybe that can be helpful in making the transition a little bit easier.
Next, I want to transition into talking about employment gaps. First, I want to really just highlight that and acknowledge that so many people face employment gaps, or a gap from one job to another, whether it's 6 months, a year, 20 years, for so many different reasons. It's perfectly normal. And employers really do care about your skills and experiences. And I do want to call out some strategies and know that these strategies are not all encompassing. These are just some strategies that you can use on an individual basis to talk about employment gaps if you choose to talk about it in an application during the hiring process as you choose, and if it's appropriate for your situation. So, some strategies that you could use are keeping it brief, addressing the gap in your employment with a concise explanation. You don't want to talk about it too much. You don't want to over exaggerate or over explain the situation or your gap. Just keep it brief and concise. And you really want to highlight your strengths. So think about the strengths that you wrote down at the very beginning of the webinar. Think about those, really pivot to your strengths, highlight your skills, and recognize how you would be a strong applicant, demonstrate how your skills and experiences make you a very strong candidate. Another thing that you can do is demonstrate your readiness. You can demonstrate your readiness by showcasing your strengths and just showing that you are ready to either return or continue in the workforce, and really just showcasing your value and everything that you have to offer to the position or the field. Some ways that you can demonstrate this during the hiring process or in an interview or to an employer, or some examples are through family care. So, for example, you could say that you took time to care for a family member, which allowed you to strengthen your time management and organizational skills. And now you are ready to resume your career in whatever field that may be. Another example could be on the topic of a career transition. So, let's say I took a year to complete a certificate program in the UX design to transition into this field, and now I'm excited to apply my skills. So you could do some professional development or things like that during the specific time you have between one position to the next. So there's many different strategies that you could utilize to talk about specific gaps of employment. And those are, like I said, not all encompassing. They're just some strategies that you could use. The next thing that I want to talk about that kind of relates to employment gaps is illegal interviewing. So these are things that employers are prohibited and legally not allowed to ask about. They include race, religion, disability, age, marital status and family, public assistance status, national origin, and there's also more in the US. I also want to call out that some exceptions do apply. So, for example, under the category of national origin, for those folks who may have a specific visa requirement, that is something that you do have to disclose to HR or during part of the application process. So, there may be some exceptions, but these are protected classes that employers are not allowed to ask about. Some strategies for responding to illegal interview questions are, for one, politely declining to answer, redirecting to your specific qualifications, addressing the question while keeping it focused on your experience. And if you feel comfortable, you can directly acknowledge the issue and call out like the appropriateness of the question. So, some examples of how to answer a potentially illegal interview question. So one example of declining to answer, if the question was, "Where are you from?" You could respond as, "I prefer to focus on my qualifications for the role," or you could also say, "My background isn't relevant to the job, but I'd be happy to discuss how my experience aligns with your needs." Another way that you could respond to the illegal interview question by answering the question is by saying, if the question was, "Are you planning to have children soon?" You could respond by saying, "Are you curious if I'm able to work nights and weekends?" Um, by answering in that way, you could recognize that the employer might be asking, like, "Hey, what is your availability like? Can we expect you to maybe come in some nights and weekends? What is your schedule like outside of work?" But by connecting those two, you can kind of recognize, like, okay, the employer might not be coming from a harmful place, depending on what their intentions may be. But that is kind of an example of answering in the best way that you possibly can. And if you have questions on whether or not a question is an illegal interview question, or if you want practice, if you want to report an illegal interview question, you can contact our office, the UMD Career Center. You can also report the illegal interview question or the department hiring process company to the company's HR department if you feel comfortable with that. in the US, you can also report them to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. There are also similar agencies in other countries where you can do that as well.
And to expand a little bit on what Mara was saying, also, we do in our office, we engage with employers, HR folks regularly and talk with them at our events and go to panels. And sometimes people have questions on, well, can I bring certain things up? For instance, maybe someone who stepped away from a role in their workplace was raising family and navigating kid activities and arranging carpools and planning events and things like that. Employers do tell us they are comfortable hearing those stories, or if that's going to help show your time management or your organizational skills or your networking. They just can't ask, so they might be hesitant to ask something like, oh, well, what were you doing during that time? Did you have a family? But you can bring it up because it's a way to showcase skills and qualities and strengths, and they're very comfortable hearing that if you as the job seeker or the employee is bringing that up too.
Yep, great point. Thank you so much for adding that, Sherrill.
So yeah, so don't hesitate to talk about it. And again, that's something you can practice with our office also, how you might bring that up or how you might highlight those strengths. Also wanted to include some resources that relate to justice involvement. So if folks are feeling like in the job search and career process that potentially some justice involvement, misdemeanor, felony, if something like that is becoming a factor in the job search, there are resources to help with that also. So some organizations like Career Force and SOAR Career Solutions do provide services for justice involvement resources, as well as coaching and practice. The UMD Career Center, of course, would also be a resource for that. We can work with folks again on how to express your qualifications, how to address questions that might be coming up inappropriately in the job search that are impeding process in getting hired. The National Employment Law Center is also included there. They're known for really spearheading the ban the box or getting questions taken off of the application that were preventing folks from moving forward and being able to showcase their qualifications because they were being ruled out earlier on in the process. As with this topic, similar to Mara mentioned, there could be some considerations related to visa or other legalities. Some of this may vary by industry too, as far as what are requirements of certain industries and certain types of jobs. So we're happy to help navigate, when and if this might be a factor and kind of where to focus your attention and or again, how to approach it if that is something that is becoming sort of an issue within your job search process and how to tackle that and navigate that in the best way. So with this is a variety of topics that we have covered, and within all of those areas, potentially, so some folks are looking to potentially land in their first job after graduation. If you're a recent alum, some are career changing, some are re-entering the workforce, and with any challenges, that could also be providing some gaps or inequities in pay or access to certain jobs or being able to get into leadership roles. And things like that. So we just want to address also some potential inequities. That might be a reason why you're considering changing your job because you are underpaid or maybe underemployed within your industry. And just to, again, kind of circle back around to what Mara was saying earlier about changing jobs and just having gaps in employment. Really, particularly since 2020, it has become quite common to have changes in job changers, gaps in potentially, workplace, employment, paid employment. So it's become very normalized. And we found that in our industry and our, research and staying up in our field, that is still very normal and very typical for job seekers to have gaps, but also that should not prevent people from getting adequate pay in their position that they're qualified for. So some of this information comes from the American Association of University Women, which the whole reason for their existence since the late 1800s was educating as many people as possible on the pay gap. And in particular, due to the association, was based on gender, that some of their statistics showed and continue to show that women are still, this is current information, women are paid less than men by the hour. 82 cents per hour is about what you'll see, and that women tend to be overrepresented in low-wage jobs. This was also a real factor during COVID. If you look at the research during that time, a lot more women were leaving the workforce who were raising families due to the additional implications of navigating COVID. This also relates to other identities. You can see for women of color or other identities that those can also play a factor in people receiving less salary than other folks with other identities. So overall, of course, this impacts our economy overall and the amount of money someone's able to earn throughout their entire career. So this is another topic that we will help folks navigate in not only providing information, but in maybe practicing salary negotiation, helping to develop strategies to prevent, if at all possible, this from happening. So also, I don't want the strategies to seem that they would only be for one certain identity group. There are things that we can all learn from better negotiating and navigating this process and being able to come up with specific or concrete information that will help everyone to be paid what they should be earning. So some strategies with that. So some of this is from AAUW and a combination of resources as we've worked with folks over the years and with HR folks in kind of some salary negotiation strategies. So the first thing really, and this goes all the way back to that first exercise of coming up with some of your strengths. So really knowing the value that you bring, really being able to speak to that and really show why what you have then relates to this organization or this position and how you can really help their organization if they select you. Really practicing expressing accomplishments with details. So things like, the specific skills or strengths you did use when you accomplished something, not just, I did this, but, here's the strengths or skills that I used. Here's how it would be relevant here. Here's maybe some numbers or some feedback, some, compliments you received. Frequency that you did things. So really kind of pulling together those details so that you can say, yes, maybe that you haven't had a particular job in your field, but, showcasing the number of different projects or research assignments you did during your undergraduate career. Taking examples from other industries if you're looking to change to say, here's where I have had this same impact here in this other situation, and here's where it would relate. So knowing yourself, and then knowing salaries and what's expected for a certain industry. Some are very evident. If you are looking to work in education or for the government, it's very clear. You can usually find that salary information online, or we can help you with that. And you can, I'll give you some sources, and we'll give you some sources in just a moment. But really knowing what is expected for that field. When you are negotiating, if you are in a position that allows for negotiation, really taking that goal of aiming even a little bit higher than what you want, because, it is a back and forth, it is a conversation, they might counter with something. So, maybe aiming for, once you've done your research on the salaries, a little bit higher, and then knowing there's a little wiggle room there, but also knowing kind of your walk away point as well, if you think that that they're not able to negotiate something that is going to be satisfying for you. And there is some back and forth. And also during this process, considering the other benefits you might negotiate for, if they come back with, we've already done our budget for the year. This is what we are able to offer salary wise, kind of knowing what some of those other factors that might help you make the decision, more paid time off or being able to flex your hours or things like that, that might make that position also still lucrative to you. Because maybe they can help with some, whether it's a signing bonus or, some moving expenses or something like that, that, would not impact, say, what they have budgeted for the role. And then you can always, at any time, ask to revisit the topic. So if you do not come to an agreement that is satisfying to you, to say, when would we be able to revisit this topic? Maybe it's once you're in the job and have worked for a few months. But it's always appropriate to go back and say, like, could we reconsider that? Now I'm in the job. I feel like I've accomplish these things, and I still feel like that my value would be higher than what I'm being offered at this time. So some resources, as I said, these are some sort of reliable resources that we have used or refer people to. There are others. We'll also give you a link to our website in general, and we have other job search and salary resources there, but these are some that you might find to be helpful. Some common ones: salary.com, PayScale, Glassdoor, and then if you are a recent grad, looking at the salaries that recent grads are reporting receiving, so that, right out of college. So that's another good one too if you're a recent alum.
So throughout the presentation, we have mentioned you can follow up with our office. You can follow up with our office. So this is how you can follow up with our office. As an alum of UMD, you have full access to the Career Center. If you go to the website careers.d.umn.edu/alum, which is now linked in the chat, thank you, Jill. You can see the list of all of the things that you have to offer. That we have to offer you as UMD alum. I do want to highlight just a few key things that we have to offer for you all. We have appointments, we have document review, so those consist of like cover letters, resumes, CVs, all of that great stuff. We have some career assessments. So in the beginning, as we were talking about strengths, if you were like, I have some strengths, but I'm not convinced. Those are some things that we can do to help you bring out some of those things. We also have Handshake, which is our online job posting board, and some career events like career fairs, things like that. We also have our email addresses directly listed on this slideshow. This slideshow is going to be shared with all of you following the presentation. So don't feel the need to scribble everything down right now. Know that you all will get this following the presentation. Sherrill, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, nothing really to add, but just to sort of reiterate what Mara was saying there. Also, that is one advantage, and we both proudly have our alumni pins also. But one advantage of attending a medium-sized university is that full access to resources and our services after that. We have the right number of alums that we can continue to serve our alums and current students. So definitely reach out. And I know some people maybe are attending from other campuses, or maybe you had a degree that you earned at UMD, but other degrees at other institutions. We have worked with folks from other campuses as well, and we do to some extent to work with community members. We are providing you with some, but not of course an exhaustive list of resources. But if you want to email or meet with us and connect to help maybe find resources even more specific to your unique situation, that's something we can go through and help you navigate that. Or if if it's something that you are living out of state or out of the country, and maybe some of these aren't as relevant to your situations, we can help you find some more specific to your area, and all of those things. So, and then there's just the link to our website in general, but so much information there for alums, and just really anyone that you can hopefully incorporate and help to empower you in your searching.
I think this is all that we have for the presentation. Now we are going to transition into more of like the Q&A sort of things. I know we have a fair amount of questions that are specific in the chat. So I think we'll start off doing that.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for leading us through that very interesting conversation. And as Mara just mentioned, we are now taking live questions. And it'd be great if you could submit them in on the Q&A button using that function on Zoom. And we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. We did have a few come in through the registration, so I think we'll maybe start tackling those, and then we'll keep an eye on the Q&A here as we move along. So the first question, and I'll let Mara or Cheryl let you decide who might be the one to answer this one or respond to it. But how can I make myself stand out as a candidate just through an online application? Looks like maybe Cheryl froze. Mara, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I think Sherrill froze. Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. So I think it's important to note that an online application is absolutely a great opportunity to highlight like your skills, your experiences. Know that it's not like just an online application. It is truly an application. Someone is going to read it. It might be like an HR rep. It might be the person who could be supervising you one day. It could be a coworker. So I think something to note that depending on the amount of applications you are putting out, you want to make sure that it is quality over quantity. Depending on where you are, I'm making a couple of assumptions here. But you really want to tailor your application to the position. So really tie those experiences to the job description, and make sure that you're aligning it as best as possible to really showcase those skills and experiences. I think that's one way to stand out without getting more nitty-gritty specific.
So kind of a follow-up, somewhat of a follow-up to that question, just came in applications that only ask for a resume. Should there be a specific section on the resume that includes strengths?
Um, there definitely can be, but also they're going to want sort of justification of those. So if it makes sense to call those out, or if that's how you like to organize that information, it might be something they notice right away. But definitely they want to see things in context too, because you'll earn more points throughout the process, whether it's a tracking system or a human, if you can then also explain, the projects or the specific positions, the volunteer work, or where you've actually used those, and then give more concrete details there too. Anything to add?
Yeah, I think so. One way to do that is to take what you think your strengths are and kind of leverage those into your bullet points in that resume. So explain how you used your strength in X position, as like a bullet point.
And then one of the questions that came in during the presentation, since we're on the topic of resumes here, wondering should soft skills be included on a resume as well?
Think we sort of call them career skills. There's certain from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, sort of our overarching professional association. There's certain skills that all employers are going to want, like communication and leadership and problem solving, critical thinking. So yeah, they are highly relevant. Again, when you can maybe give a context or a more specific example, that might resonate a little bit more. And then also really going back to the job description, really what they're looking for, and then really trying to really highlight everything that's within that. And likely there will be some of those that maybe folks have traditionally called soft skills or transferable skills. So using kind of the job posting itself as a guide to what to like mainly highlight or highlight more extensively on your resume. Also, that's the part of that standing out in the job search when submitting an online application. It's like, you really need to kind of call that out or really bring that to their attention more because they maybe haven't had an opportunity to engage or explain it to them.
All right. Kind of another question related to resumes, but really connected to ATS or applicant tracking system. This person is wondering, how do you design a slim resume to meet ATS requirements rather than rewriting for each position?
I think definitely Mara will jump in on this too, I'm sure, but you should have a master resume or resume bank or somewhere where you keep everything. So that can be designed around your industry. And then you can sort of pull things or edit things as needed. But really you do it to move forward in the job search process. You will get more traction if it does feel like you're really tailoring it. So yes, having a good base for your resume cover letter, but then you do really want to adapt it to each particular position and or employer, because then that's when people tend to move forward a little bit more quickly. So it's not just putting in more applications, but it's putting in more tailored applications is usually when you'll start to see more success. So you can use some of our guidelines that we have in our career guide, which you can access on our website, and just other information about navigating ATSs, but the employers, they all have different ones. So there's some commonalities, but really just getting those keywords and those experiences where you use those keywords to really capture their attention a little bit more.
And then there was another question that came in, again, about resumes, wondering how you can highlight additional roles that you've had at a different job that are maybe not super applicable to the job that you're applying for. Do you have any recommendations for that?
I guess figuring what that says about you. There's certain skills that you used, or if maybe that's where you can highlight some of those career skills or soft skills. Also, you can use it to show things like motivation, time management. So I guess just writing your bullet points or your description in a way that's going to, I guess, sort of explain to them a little bit so that they're intrigued enough to call you back. Just, what that's saying about you, that you took on these additional duties, and that shows leadership, or that shows strong work ethic or strong time management because you were able to do this above and beyond your job. So it's sort of like why you're listing them. And they can be within the job, but if you feel like that is something that you want to highlight even more, you could have it in like a project section or somewhere else too to draw, or additional leadership or something like that to draw more attention if you feel like it's just not enough to have say a bullet point. So really it's just, what do you want to showcase? And then we can help you navigate what's the best way to make sure that that story is coming across and that you are highlighting not just following a resume format or whatever, but is that really showcasing and telling the story that you want them to see when they are looking at this document?
To add to that, too, I would also say look at the employer themselves, not necessarily the specific position, and see if any of those experiences have anything to do with the company, the employer, what the employer or company does, some of their mission, vision, goals, if anything relates in that realm, and kind of maybe tailor some of your categories. So instead of saying like projects or leadership, could you change it to like philanthropy, anything along those lines? You can get creative on your resume.
Okay, I think we'll pivot a little bit with some of these questions. Wondering about remote work. Do you have tips on finding remote work, job hunting, when you maybe live in a rural area?
So it's like, who's going to go first? Um, So you will find still, this became really, I strongly noticed this during COVID, but it would really be emphasized if something was remote, and it was still, even still to this day, you can search, remote X position, remote marketing manager or whatever it might be. If nothing else, if you just, even if it's not in the title, it used to be just really right in the title of the job. But it's still going to be listed somewhere. So using, Handshake or LinkedIn or whatever source you're using to search, if you put that in there, usually it will pull, the ones that are remote. Still, networking is important, networking through LinkedIn or other sources to still be trying to make connections, maybe connecting with recruiters or people who work at the company or organization. In Handshake, you can often find we encourage employers to have contact information if they are recruiters. So you might find someone you can chat with or email or connect with on LinkedIn. So kind of just really using those resources to really, continue networking, even if it's not an area that you're currently living in.
Mara, do you have anything to add to that?
I think, yeah, all of the things that Cheryl said and kind of like get creative with the filters. You can use the Control F feature and try to just like do a quick search of finding remote in the position if that is a walking away point for you and you are definitely only looking for remote positions, look for it in the job description. If it doesn't clarify for you, try and contact the HR manager that is on file or the search committee that is on the job description and find out right away before you apply, to save some time on the front end before you apply and learn later that it isn't remote. That could be a strategy as well. But there's lots of different companies, especially on LinkedIn, I've seen recently that are recruiting for remote positions. So just keep going. And I've heard lots of remote positions are very sought after. So just keep searching for those. They're there.
Okay, and this other question that came in is wondering about short-term versus full-time work. Would you say that the kind of the tips and recommendations during this workshop apply to both kind of for short-term work as well? Or are there different strategies if you're looking for, a full-time job versus like a part-time or like a shorter period of working? Yeah, so just curious if these tips apply to both short-term and full-time work.
Yeah, I think, a variety of the concepts really apply. Everything from disclosing that information. I know one of the questions that came in prior to the workshop was if you should disclose if you are, looking only to be at a job part-time. And certainly that's something that you may want to just clarify, what are your temp opportunities or seasonal or part-time roles, because maybe you have another plan for, down the road. But also I feel like, if it's at all flexible, like you're maybe wanting to do something part-time, but could become more interested or maybe stay on longer term. I mean, that's partly on them too, to sort of impress you enough for you to want to stay there. So if there's some, like you want to try out another industry, but there's potential that you really could kind of become passionate about that and want to stay there. I feel like some of that we don't always know going into a job how long we're going to be somewhere. You might go into something thinking I'm going to be there till I retire, and other things you think, like you're not as interested, but realize that wow, I really developed a passion for this. So if it's not something that's just really set in stone, too, just being open to the opportunity. Kind of seeing where that leads. You don't necessarily need to tell them, your entire career plan, but yet still maybe, some interests or what you want to develop there, how you're going to contribute, some kind of maybe long-term goals, just to show that, again, you're a real person and what you would bring and why you would be interested. But yeah, I think certainly similar to looking at, things like, is this a remote position? Trying to find out if there are more temp or seasonal or reaching out to HR, what would be a good fit. Sometimes they're open to just what would be a good fit with my particular circumstances, and they might help guide you to positions that would make sense.
Sometimes to add to that, sometimes there are specific fields, employers, or companies that are more open to or just have more part-time versus full-time employees. So if you are seeking a part-time position, that is something to note as well. So for example, I know Essentia here in Duluth, Minnesota, at that facility, they have lots of different part-time employees who actually opt to be part-time, and they do have an option to be full-time, a lot of them as well. So it's interesting to find out if you have an option or what the majority of folks are doing as well. Sometimes you can find out that information, even just like by asking HR on LinkedIn, by searching on websites, things like that. But it can be industry specific. Um, that yeah, it kind of depends. It also depends on like your need as well. If you need to be full-time, if you need to be part-time. It's also important to know that people change their minds, people are flexible and fluid, and life happens as well. So you don't need to have your full career plan planned out. It's important to know that people do change their minds as well.
Okay, and I think this will be our last question of the session. But this person is wondering, kind of going back to resumes, they're wondering if there's a standard or good resume format as far as order of the pieces. And I recall that at some point there was a career handbook that had different examples of resumes. Is that something that still exists, and would provide some sort of a framework for alumni?
Yes, absolutely. Jill will probably drop it in the chat there, but there we go. We could include that in our slide too. We just put our website, but if that's something, we could specifically link to that too. So resumes can really vary too based on your experience level. I know I'm seeing different, like, how do I highlight this? I've worked X number of years already in this. I'm switching fields. So some of it is like your level of experience, how long you've been working, what degrees you have, what industry. So it still is sort of a little bit individualized. If you graduated quite a while ago, your education may not be at the top anymore. Whereas if you just graduated, you might be, really emphasizing that. So some of it can be based on your unique circumstances. So definitely when possible, we like to look at kind of your individual situation with that also. But the career guide will show you a lot of varieties of kind of basic formats, so you can pick and choose ones that fit best for your situation. I did see there was a brief question in the Q&A too about the federal resumes. I know some of us do. Jill, who's been communicating with you in the chat, and myself and others have had experience with those. So yes, feel free to reach out to us to get that looked at. But again, it kind of goes along with that. It's just, they're sort of individual or unique, not only because of you and your qualifications, but also which industries.
Anything to add to that, Mara?
I think Cheryl covered it. Again, like if you have any questions about any of this, I know we kind of did high level brief overviews on a lot of different topic areas, but as Cheryl said, we are very open to meeting with any, current students, alum. We're happy to meet with anyone. So feel free to either shoot us an email, set up an appointment. We're happy to go more in depth on any of these topic areas or any of specific questions that you may have.
Perfect. Well, I guess with that, I just like to thank both Cheryl and Mara for taking the time and lending their expertise on this topic. And as both Mara and Cheryl mentioned, we'll be sending out, you'll be receiving an email from our office here by the end of the day with a slide deck. So all this information will be included in there as well. And also, we are recording this session, and that will be uploaded to our UMD Alumni YouTube page. And so you'll be able to reference that um, shortly. Usually within a week or two, we have that up and going. So with that, I just want to thank you all for being here and hope to see you at future events. Thanks again.